Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back everybody to Fighting on Film, and this week we are covering a little known classic called A Hill in Korea, because this week marks the 70th anniversary of the Battle of the Imjin River, which was a pivotal battle in the Korean War in 1951, those gallant Gloucesters, and we wanted to cover a film set in Korea from a British perspective, and this is the only one that I think exists.
There's no choice. This is it, which is shocking. Really, when you think about it.
Possibly wouldn't be the only one that exists, because there was an Alan Ladd picture that was touted around in the mid-50s called The Glorious Gloucesters. They never got made.
Yeah, I've heard that was, a possibility, but I'm almost kind of glad it didn't get made. I don't really.
Yeah.
When Alan Ladd's not on it, when he's phoning it in like he is in, is it The Red Beret?
Yeah, that's bad. Yeah.
It's just. There's nothing there, and I think the Gloucesters probably would have deserved something a little bit better than that.
Definitely would.
A Niven-led picture, please. That would have been that would have been excellent.
Niven as James Caan in '56. Now that would have worked.
Yeah.
Before we go off into fantasy, we should go into the plot. So the film opens with a wide shot of some British troops walking through Korea, quote unquote Korea, filmed in Portugal. And opening narration says, 0600 hours on May the 10th, a patrol consisting of one officer and 15 other ranks left B Company 4 positions with orders to establish whether a village at map reference 638742 was occupied by the enemy. They crossed a wide area of open country and the morning was uneventful. By 1300 hours, they were nearing their objective.
So the interesting thing about that is it reads like an after-action report. And the film concludes with basically the end of an after-action report. I like it. And I think it's a nice little touch. It's certainly framing it in that military mindset, and it's a very business-like film.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah, it's a fighting patrol, 15 men, one officer, a sergeant, a corporal, 4 Brens, and everyone else has got either Stens or number 4s. So they're quite well armed. They're better armed than, say, a section, 4 Brens. That's significant firepower.
And an anti-tank section as well.
Yes, they do. Yeah, they have that. They have the 3.5-inch rocket launcher, which is a fantastic inclusion. That's one of my favourite things about this film.
It's not the Ali Tally yet, Matt.
No, hold me back. So
keep it back.
They're on a patrol. They're looking for the Chinese. They're basically probing to find out where the Chinese are. And I think it's set in about 51.
Yeah, it would be 51.
It doesn't actually say specifically, but yeah, it's 51. It's an interesting mixture of national servicemen and regulars, which is something that the film plays on heavily. They are on their way back from the patrol because they were tasked with checking a village. They checked the village, and on their way back, they ran into Chinese troops that were approaching from the other direction, so they tried to get around them, but they couldn't. And the film then ends as a classic sort of like Last Stand movie.
Yeah, it evolves into this sort of will they survive, won't they survive cliche.
They're up on a hill at a Buddhist temple, and they're under attack from Chinese forces. So that's basically the film in a nutshell. And
it's no frills. I mean, it's very sort of point A to point C with a little bit of point B in the middle. It's very sort of bang, bang, bang. There's your film. And I think it's telling because we think it was released as a double bill, which genuinely you don't get two top quality pictures on the double bill. They usually.
Michael Caine mentions that it was buried at the bottom of a double bill.
Yeah. Which is weird because we'll come on to the cast now, and it's an obscenely good cast for the time, but but at the time they're relatively unknowns. So you've got George Baker, who plays Lieutenant Butler.
Yeah.
He was in the Dam Busters. Harry Andrews of The Hill fame plays Sergeant Payne. He's
brilliant in this.
He's absolutely incredible in it. Stan Baker plays Corporal Riker, obviously Zulu, The Cruel Sea. He's no stranger to the FOF fans. Robert Shaw turns up as Lance Corporal Hodge from Battle of the Bulge, infamously, and in Jaws as well, let's not forget. Michael Caine in his first movie credit, which is amazing, looks so young in it. He almost doesn't look like Michael Caine.
He does, yeah.
He plays Private Lockyer. Ronald Lewis, Private White, and Harry Landis, who fans of Friday Night Dinner will know him as Mr. Morris, the sort of ratty, like comic relief grandpa sort of type character in it. But he plays Private Rabin, and he's the sort of cheeky, bantery sort of national service.
He's the comic relief, and I think really he's the film's mouthpiece.
Definitely, yeah.
He puts across everything that this film wants to say.
He's always like, put the Chinese in a football stadium, and then we'll fight them. Everyone will pay $10 to come see it. He's all talks like a common man.
He has some great lines, like talking to the colonel, waving his checkbook. The sanest man in Korea describes himself as, and he has that great scene where he describes a monument to himself, and he says it's Jackie Rabin, the immortal soldier, died avoiding action, unwashed, undefeated, profaning victory, loused up in defeat.
I love it.
He has all the best lines, really.
He's fantastic in it.
Yeah, how he didn't get nominated for anything is a little bit surprising.
The film doesn't get put up for any awards, which is a shame, because now you look at that cast, you're like, there's stars, bona fide, every single one.
There's also people that you recognise from films around that time, and later on you've got Percy Herbert, who's a stalwart British character actor at that point, dozens of classic war movies, and Stephen Boyd.
Oh yeah,
he was a big name too. It's really interesting to see all of these people that have become, household names of the late 20th century before their household names.
Yeah, and they're not phoning it in because obviously they can't fall back on previous mega hit films to fall back on. I thought it was interesting. Stan Baker's putting on a speech impediment.
Yeah, there's a bit of a stammer, isn't there?
A bit of a stammer the first time you see him.
I wonder if that's from the book.
Well, it could be, yeah, because it's based on a book.
The film is based on a book by Max Cato. It was published under the pen name Simon Kent.
Yep.
Cato wasn't a Korean war veteran.
Interesting.
And not many of the cast were.
No.
Only Caine.
Only Caine.
Caine was the only national serviceman that had been in Korea. Obviously, there was people that had served, and there were people in the cast that had been national servicemen. Harry Andrews had been in the Royal Artillery. And Stan Baker had been in the Royal Army Service Corps. Victor Madden had been in the Merchant Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Percy Herbert had been Royal Ordnance Corps.
Wow.
And he was a prisoner of war with the Japanese.
Oh, wow.
You got plenty of military experience to draw on.
Yeah, yeah. They don't look wrong in it. They don't look like actors trying to be soldiers. They do look quite natural in it. And I think that, that obviously harkens back to the days of national service when everyone would have had at least some military training. So it's produced by Wessex Films, and it was released on the 18th of September 1956. I dug up from the archives a retro review, which we always like to read out if we can.
Ooh, brilliant.
So this comes from the Sunday Mirror on the 23rd of September, only a few days after release, 1956. When it comes to realistic war films, the British usually hit the spot. A Hill in Korea is no exception. The fighting scenes are tough enough to give even the most enthusiastic volunteer a whole heap of second thoughts. A young officer, George Baker, and his patrol of national servicemen, who are about as battle-hardened as a troop of Girl Guides, are cut off in Korea. They are charged, sniped at, bombarded by the Chinese, blasted by their own planes. The survivors win though, with jutting chins, grim faces, and visions of a Saturday night at the Palais firmly fixed in their minds. This movie may not get the army many recruits, but it will win them a lot of film fans.
Good review.
Yeah, it's a darn good review.
It's an interesting production. So it's an hour and 21 long.
Yeah.
So it's not an overly long film.
Not long at all.
It's directed by Julian Ames.
He did Jane Eyre in the 80s with Timothy Dalton.
He only did 2 feature films. So he did Hill in Korea, and then he did A Miracle in Soho, which was a kitchen sink-ish sort of drama.
Something like that. They're popular in the 60s.
And he predominantly did TV work before and after. So that's what he became known for. Screenplays by Anthony Squire. Again, not a Korean War veteran, but an experienced writer, TV director, second unit director, that is. So he knew how to do set piece.
Definitely.
And action sequences.
Co-writing with him was Ian Dalrymple? Difficult one to pronounce that.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave it to you because you had something to say about him.
He was involved in the Crown Film Unit in the Second World War, and he was producer on some really famous Ministry of Information films. So he was a producer on Target for Tonight, The Lion Has Wings, Fires Were Started. Pick a big Crown Film Unit hit, and he probably was involved. I mean, and you can see in some sequences, like the way the shots are done, it's very sort of like matter of fact. I want to show you X. Here is X. I don't know how to say it. Like it's quite
businesslike,
yeah, filmmaking, yeah. But it works.
It's interesting you should mention the cinematography because it was Freddie Francis's first film. And Freddie Francis is an Oscar-winning cinematographer. He won an Oscar in, I think, 1960 for Sons and Lovers.
Okay.
And then the one that, stands out to me is he won an Oscar for the cinematography on Glory from 1989, the American Civil War movie.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is a beautifully shot film.
That is. I mean, what a trajectory.
So this was his first film. And,
wow.
There's glimmers of that, like that skill, definitely. So the film was shot on location in Portugal.
Yep.
And at Shepperton Studios. And the score was done by Malcolm Arnold, who actually won an Oscar for the score for Bridge on the River Kwai.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is great. And lastly, before we move on to Ali Tally, we couldn't move on any further without talking about Michael Caine's experiences on the film, because it's quite funny what he gets up to. So he's brought in as an actor / military advisor, and I'm not sure if he was brought on as an advisor and then they gave him some lines, or whether he was brought on as an actor and somehow said one day, I was in Korea, like just on set. Awful Michael Caine there. Yeah, he writes many years later. He says, my function as technical advisor was completely ignored during the making of the film. For example, I was advised the crew to spread the troops as wide as they could as the latter advanced, which was military correct. But they replied that they didn't have a lens of sufficient width to take it all in. I also pointed out that the officer would have removed his signs of rank and worn a hat, the same as the other men, to disguise which one was in command. But George Baker was allowed to go into battle with all his badges and hat gleaming, which an officer in a real fight, he would never have lasted 10 seconds.
Yeah, he does have his pips. Yeah, that's a good point.
He does, yeah. Takes him off at the end, I noticed.
Does he?
Yeah, I think he rips them off at the end, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, but he does have the same hat, though. But he is wearing a rather nice cravat.
He's wearing a spiffing, proper, dotty number, isn't he? Yeah, I like that.
Very nice.
Yeah.
There's a set photo, which is in colour, and it's burgundy. That will play off lovely off that green.
Remind the lads of Christmas back home, wouldn't it? Yeah, but I like that little touch.
It's interesting
anyway.
You should mention that he told them to spread out, because I noticed when they were approaching the village, they were quite well spread.
Yeah, they weren't too bad.
Probably not as well as they should have been, but
yeah,
for a war movie of the 50s, pretty good.
Bad. And then the last thing Michael Caine said, the most glaring mistake that never brought to their notice was that Portugal did not least resemble Korea. If anything, Wales was more similar. I did not say anything because I wanted to stay in Portugal. I could go to Wales any old time. They paid me to be here, so I might as well enjoy it.
I did see another quote from him, I think from either an interview or one of his books, and he says, I had 8 lines in that picture and I screwed up 6 of them.
It's so really true.
There's one where they're marching and he goes, yeah, it's probably morning or something like that. And then there's the famous one that always gets put in Michael Caine documentaries, that kind of thing, where he comes down the stairs in the temple and he says, pity, he was the toughest bloke we had.
But to be fair, Blinken, you'll miss him anyway, because and Blinken, you'll miss a lot of the characters.
So there's a couple of scenes where you can see where they've cut him. There's a bit where he's in the tower next to George Baker, and it looks like he's about to turn and say something, and then it just cuts away.
Do you think now, though, whoever owns the copyright to this film is probably really annoyed that they can't do an edit that has more Caine in it to make a bit of money?
Oh yeah, no doubt, because that'll be long gone.
Yeah.
Whatever landed on the cutting room floor is long gone.
I'm surprised they've not rushed a reissue out that has Caine as the main actor on the billing.
Okay, Caine holding the Bren gun, instead of
well, modern day Caine, really just holding out this big Bren. That'd be brilliant.
She was just 14 years old. Pass me another Bren, Mac.
This is my English Bren. I think we should. With that, I think we should move on to the Ali Tally this week.
I think so.
It's time for Ali Tally on Fighting on Film.
So this week's Ali Tally is going to be chock full of
Brens.
Yeah, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. So for me this week, my Ali Tally is just seeing Korean War British infantry in film, because that is very rarely done and rarely seen.
This is it.
And this is it.
Yeah.
For now, this is it. Perhaps the anniversary will reinvigorate some interest in the British in Korea, because I for one would love to see it. But yeah, they were in the summer. Much deserved. They're wearing their summer uniforms. They've got their summer hot weather caps on. 44 pattern webbing, which is really nice to see. Mark 5 Stens, number 4 Leonville rifles, and Brens, and 3.5-inch bazookas.
Oh, and not forgetting Baker's or Lieutenant Butler is Enfield number 2 Mark 1.
Oh, yes.
The revolver, which you see ever so briefly.
He does pull it. He pulls it on Wyatt, doesn't he, when he tries to escape?
He's got all the heavy hitters, all the classics. Obviously, the only one that was different there from World War II is the 3.5-inch. I think this is definitely the only depiction of it in British hands.
In film, definitely.
And it's possibly one of the best on-screen depictions of a 3.5-inch. Not many others, but I think this is a really good one. Well, we'll talk about that more in a minute.
Well, definitely. But I like the fact they're seeing carrying it all the way through. It just doesn't appear when it's needed. These guys actually have a role to play, so they have to hump the thing around. You've got a radio man who doesn't like humping the radio about. You can tell some of these men not everyone's versed in the Bren, but they're all carrying Bren magazines. So in the scene where they need all 4 Brens, everyone produces their Bren magazines and gives it to the gunners. I like that little touch. Whoever's saying, look, we all carry Bren mags because we've all got to supplement the Bren team.
Exactly.
I like that little inclusion because it means someone on set was like, no, it's done this way.
Yeah, that was doctrine since before the Second World War.
Of course. But not many films you don't really ever see it where someone produces a Bren mag for the Bren who's not a Bren gunner.
As a diversionary effort, Lieutenant Butler decides to put 4 men, fire team, with all of the Brens on a burial mound.
Yep.
They only rise in the ground in the area, and draw the Chinese in sort of to probe them and thinking they're a larger element, and then opening up on them when they get within range. And that scene is excellent. I don't know whether we're going to talk about that in.
Yeah, we'll save it for fave scenes because
I think so.
Action is a bit thin on the ground in this one. There's 2 major parts, and we're going to cover both of them in the fave scenes. That's why we didn't go in depth with plot, because it's basically the plot. So yeah, and the other thing that I just like to see was sort of the more 50s influence of sort of hairstyles were a little bit more rockabilly sort of look.
Baker's and George Baker's prescription glasses.
Such a nice little touch, and they're not things that obviously they'd have just been normal when this film comes out, but now it is a contrast to the Second World War films, just additions that sort of make it Korea and don't make it a flick set in Burma, for say. It
has that look, that 50s look, that sort of like Korea, Malaya, Borneo, Radfan feel.
And they've got their Bergens on and their packs on as well. It's really nice to see, and machetes as well, which is ace.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff, weapons wise in this movie. So the Chinese have a Madsen light machine gun, which is one of the first light machine guns ever developed, and that isn't unlikely because a lot of them did make it into China before and during the revolution, and the Civil War.
Yeah.
So that's not something that would be unusual. And then the rifles that they have are a bit unusual though.
Yeah, I couldn't pin them.
They have Mauser. I think they're 1871s.
Right.
I don't know. You don't get to see them close enough.
No, you don't.
But the way you can tell is they have that side-mounted bayonet.
Right.
And the shape of the bolt.
I knew you'd know that.
Kind of tell that way. They're in place of sort of Mosin Nagants.
Mosins, yeah.
Yeah, and possibly some like Chinese Mauser K98K copies that they did. There's also like a submachine gun that's seen in a couple of scenes in Chinese hands.
Not quite sure what it is, are we?
No, I can't make it out. It's bugging me. It's horizontal mag.
Yeah.
Standard sort of like traditional stock, no pistol grip.
No.
But it's not like a Bergman MP28 or an MP18. It kind of reminds me of an MP41, which is by the barrel profile.
Yeah.
But the magazine's not in the right place. So I don't know. Anyway, my copy of the film, and even the copy that Talking Pictures recently played, couldn't quite make out.
There's not a real crisp version of the film, is there? It's a bit...
Sadly not.
And then I think the last thing, so towards the end of the film, there's an airstrike called in. I thought they were Gloucester Beaters, because I was like, oh, Gloucester Beaters, they've got to be. Like, it's a British film in Korea, they have to be Gloucester Beaters. Come on. And then I was like, oh, hang on, no, they're not. They can't
Because
be.
they have those end of wing pods.
Yeah. And Matt found out what they were.
So they're actually Lockheed T-33 shooting stars.
Wow.
And I found that out because I realised the film's made in Portugal. So I thought, well, what did the Portuguese Air Force have in 1956? To look that up. T-33 shooting stars, training planes. So yeah, there you go. I think that's what they are.
They could have got away with using Mustangs.
Oh yeah.
Because they could have got away with using Typhoons as well. Some Australian units really early on were still using, Australian Air Force units were still using Typhoons and things like that. So you could have got away with World War II vintage.
So, yeah, definitely.
Because you're just dropping 9 times out of 10, you're dropping napalm.
But they probably wanted the cool kit, didn't they? You know, it's a movie. They always want the good kit. It's the jet age. They want a jet.
Of course it is. Yeah, I didn't think that. Yeah, no, that's
so
good.
I think that's why. And you know what? They look legit.
They do. They do.
So yeah, that's cool. Oh, and the only other thing is the tank.
Yes.
Chinese tank.
The Chinese Cromwell.
I'm gonna say it's captured.
Gotta be. I mean, isn't there some story of a Cromwell going up against a Centurion?
I don't know.
It's in one of those clickbaity.
It's probably a Mark Felton video about that.
I think there might be. Yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking. It's not wrong, which was nice. You know, not like it's not like a leopard in a bridge too far, is it? It's like, oh
yeah. I suppose there's stories from Imjin where they were napalming Centurions that had been knocked out. And they were napalming them to make sure the Chinese didn't get their hands on. Centurion's the best tank in the world at that point.
Exactly. You don't want a reverse engineered Chinese Centurion coming over the hill.
Definitely not.
Be a bit upset.
So I don't know whether they would have done the same thing to a Cromwell. Possibly not. I don't know. But
yeah, it's definitely a Cromwell. It's not a comet. Some
it's
people
not.
think
Yeah,
it is.
some sources do say a comet. Completely different turret. Right hull, different turret.
Yep.
I wonder if they were in Portuguese service. They must have been.
Oh, that's a good. Yeah, maybe they were.
Which is interesting.
Tank experts, notes on a postcard, please. So there's only 2 real standout scenes. Me and Matt will do both. Start the film. They've established that they've gone to the village. One of their lads buys it. Unfortunately, there was a booby trap set by 2 Chinese sympathetic Koreans.
Yeah.
And they were running away, and Baker goes and shoots them. He looks hard as nails when he comes back.
Yeah, rifle over his shoulder, just sauntering back into the village.
But that's the thing. In the film, all of the quote-unquote named actors playing the regular soldiers, they get the meatier parts, which I think is quite interesting from a casting point of view. So as they're making their way back from the village, they see a Chinese column coming up towards them. George Baker realises they haven't been seen, so he tries to trick the Chinese forces into thinking that there's more of them. So they break branches off a tree, and as they run up to this mound to set up their Brens, they make dust behind them, so it looks like a larger force is behind the ridge. It's quite clever, like that. And then they start digging in. They set up their Brens. Harry Andrews and the rest of the lads try to double back round to miss out the column. And then you just get Bren-ageddon.
The most gratuitous Bren I've ever seen.
It's so good, isn't it?
It's peak Bren porn. It really is. There's no other film better that does more Bren than this film, I don't think.
And if you want to see 4 Brens with blank adapters going for it, this is the film for you as well.
So did you notice that it cuts back between the blank firing adapter and standard barrels? So it cuts between... So there's a couple of Mark 3s with the shorter barrel, and there's a couple of Mark 2s.
Yeah.
With the slightly longer barrel, and it cuts between them. So when they're not firing, they're the proper barrels.
Yeah, obviously I said in the alley tale that you get a bit where they're giving each other the ammunition.
Yeah.
Then you get a bit with a jam. Harry Landis, Private Rabin, gets a jam, and he's like, "Oh, it's jammed," and
it's a moment of jeopardy, that, isn't it?
Because he's panicking.
There's real panic.
He's like, "It's jammed," and then George Baker, lieutenant, goes, "Check the regulator." He gets a spent round, and you see him fiddling about with a regulator on front of the gun.
Yeah, just change the gas setting so the port's more open, because they're lying in like a sandy burial mound.
Yep.
So yeah, the dust's going to get in the action, and it's going to slow, and they're putting a lot of rounds down, so it's going to foul. So open up the gas port a little bit more gas going into the action, cycle it, and it works perfectly.
They absolutely hammer these Chinese troops that are coming in human wave attacks.
That's quite well done. We get a good idea of a large number of Chinese, which is and they do probing attacks, which is something the Chinese did as well, isn't it?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So they didn't, the Chinese were quite well known before Imjin for doing sort of probing attacks, not just going all in. Once they found what they thought was a weakness, then they do a human wave attack.
But no, it's just nice to see in a Korean War film, just out of nowhere, loads of brains. It's just great. I had in my notes, so coined a new phrase, BBE, big brain energy, which I will now use.
Another element of that scene that I liked is the bit where there's a lull and they're reloading mags. And Robert Shaw's character, Lance Corporal Hodge, takes Rabin's mag off him and says, "You're messing that up," and he strips out 2 rounds.
Yeah.
And puts puts one in, hands it back to him. He says, "You'll mess that up, you'll get us killed." And I think that's a nod to rim jam.
I think it might have been, yeah.
He's not lining up the rims properly.
Well, it's another dig at him being national service. That's what I thought, because all the regulars are digging the national service lads at any opportunity they get. Because Harry Andrews and Baker's character is always like, "Oh, don't worry, sir. I know you're national service, but I think you're doing a good job." It's always a little bit like that.
Yeah. Shaw has a lovely little line when the cacophony of the Chinese bugles kick up and the cymbals, and he says, "Proper jazz session, isn't it?"
I love it. Great. The banter's quality in this film.
It is. And that's something I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think the chemistry amongst the cast is excellent.
Really good.
I think they've nailed the right amount of like complaining and banter.
Yeah. I'll probably say it later, but it's complaining behind the scenes. So you're never openly complaining to your officer and your NCOs because you respect them. But with your mates, you'll wax lyrical.
Yeah,
I like that. Tell us about Bazooka versus Cromwell.
Oh, yeah. So that is my pick. So they fall back on a temple on a hill, which has a cliff to its rear. So it's a relatively good last stand position. There's only one way the Chinese can come up. And somehow the Chinese get a Cromwell, a tank up a hill track, which is, quite impressive. There's a lovely little scene where the 3.5-inch or M20 Super Bazooka, as it was known in American service, comes into action. And Lieutenant Butler calls up for the 3.5-inch. And there's a really interesting bit where they're talking about why they haven't fired. And he says, "I'd prefer to be closer, like within 80 yards.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that's well within what the 3.5 was capable of. So the 3.5 was capable of hitting a stationary target at around 300 to 350 yards.
Right.
So they could have hit that tank, no bother.
Yeah, I thought that as well. When they were like, I was like, you can hit it from there. Come on.
Yeah, so if you had an M1 bazooka, like the first bazooka, then yes, you'd want to be closer. If you had a Piat, then yes, you would definitely want to be closer. But with a 3.5-inch, you can reliably hope to hit a target at 300 yards, which is well within what it was. It was probably like 200, 250 max at that point. But yeah, they go forward. They go forward to a slit trench, which is probably about 80 yards away from the tank. And he puts 2 rounds into it. He puts one into the hull and then another into the track.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. And it's sort of like the tank slides back down the hill.
It's like, what are you aiming at? He goes, I'm trying to take the track out.
Yeah.
Did it to his mate, who's the number 2. So that's quite funny. Just the banter in the heat of the moment, I really like in that scene. It's just like, come on, shoot the tank. Like, come on, I want to go. And he's just like, I'm trying to actually aim a shot here. It's like,
the only way that scene could have been better would be if they'd showed it being loaded.
Yes, that's the only thing they did.
Because that's always cool to see.
They showed it from broken to being set up, which was nice.
They did,
and
they show it being taken apart again as well, which is very cool.
Really cool.
Because they're actually quite light.
It's just a tube, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a tube, and they break down into 2 pieces. But it's really interesting to see in a film, and especially in British hands.
Yeah, probably one of the most nifty bits of kit that the British troops have out there.
Definitely, and it was brand new.
Yeah.
So I actually own a provisional pamphlet, which is the training manual for the 3.5-inch. The first draft came out in 51, and then the secondary draft was finalised in April 52.
Wow, that's quick.
And then you get the final sort of like little blue small arms training pamphlet. Up until that point, British Army's infantry anti-tank weapon was still the Piat. There are actually like photographs of Piats in Korea. So there are photographs that are believed to be Korea. So there were Piats there.
Yeah.
So if it had been a Pier, then the 80-yard comment would have been totally legit.
Mm.
But for a 3.5-inch,
Inclusion of a Cromwell. I mean, when do you ever see Cromwells in film?
yeah,
Come on,
that might be actually the only time a Cromwell's ever seen in a film.
Possibly. Oh no, there's some in Band of Brothers.
Is there? Okay.
In the Nijmegen episode, I think there's a Cromwell there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You get heavy LMG use, sorry, a bazooka scene, and a napalm strike right at the end. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
They're like the three major things you want. And that is literally unfortunately, that is literally the film though, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I suppose we should talk a little bit about the characters and how they develop and what the actual film is trying to say. Now that we've done the cool kit and the cool scenes, the film has an agenda. And I think that Harry Landis' character, Private Rabin, is the mouthpiece of the film. You know, he's always talking about the dynamic between the West and China and North Korea. So he's talking about, you know, their differences and, you know, why the Chinese are, you know, why they're more likely to fight because they haven't experienced the pleasures of the West, sort of thing. Like he doesn't, you know, they don't know the joys of going for a pint. He talks about, or, you know, queuing to get into a club, or, you know, going to watch a football match.
Because this is still very height of communist fear.
It's weird in that it isn't totally anti-communist. It isn't rapidly anti-communist. Obviously, it's very much a film of its time. Everyone's, you know, describing the enemy as like gooks and chinks, slant eyes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of like racial slurs and stereotypes in there. But, you know, it's a film from the 50s.
I mean, God,
and that is exactly what they would have said anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there were still British troops out in Korea in 1956 at peacekeepers.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, it's of its time. I mean, obviously, it's like God. You know, calm it down the slurs, lads. You know, it's a bit.
But that's it. It's soldiers. It's soldiers in the field fighting an enemy.
Of course.
And you're not gonna, you know, there's going to be no holds barred when it comes to like describing your enemy.
No, of course.
Especially when they're trying to kill you. Oh, they killed your mates. They're gonna bring out the slurs, aren't they?
No, of course. Yeah.
Now they probably would have dialed that down if this film was made today.
Mm.
And I think that would take away from, you know, the reality of the dialogue. And I think it's interesting, you know, that we have Landis talking a lot about the interplay between the West and China and, you know, communism. But then at the same time, there's a lot of talk about the class elements and the bouncing off of regular and national servicemen.
Yep.
So it's a film that's sort of like trying to get across the British Army is sort of broken up into the two parts. The regular soldier, so you've got Harry Andrews, you've got Stan Baker,
yeah,
and then you've got your part-time, well, not part-time, but your conscript soldier.
Possibly younger as well, a lot younger.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a really nice scene in the village where Harry Andrews, who plays Sergeant Payne, tells the two Korean villagers to emshi. Yep. Which is Arabic for go away. And that is a lovely hint that he is a career soldier that has served around the world. So he might have been in North Africa, he might have been in the Middle East. So that just little inclusion is sort of a thing. He's a regular soldier who has served around the world, and he's picked up these words.
And there's just something about the way that, like, I don't know whether it's just maybe reading too much into it, the way Harry Andrews like handles himself as well in it. He feels more at home. Like, possibly that's from his time in the Royal Artillery, but the way he's holding his sten in some scenes, and
definitely think so.
Just little bits, sort of, and then I don't know if it's a conscious thing, but Landis, when he's lugging that Bren about, he looks like he wants to be doing anything but, you know. And you got Wyatt with the radio, you know.
Yeah, we should talk a bit about Wyatt because his character's pretty important, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean he's played to be a bit of a coward, isn't he? You know.
Yeah, and that's where that class element comes in. So he's talking about, I'm different, I'm not like the others.
That's it, yeah.
Over and over. So they're in the temple and he's talking to George Baker. And I think Wyatt sees Butler as more of a, you know, more akin.
Mm.
He sees himself as, you know, he has more in common with Baker than he probably does with, you know, Rabin or, you know, Sims or Lockyer.
Yep.
what he means when he says, "I'm different. I'm not like them. I was brought up in a nice home," etc. And he talks about his sort of like upbringing, and he doesn't want to be in a war. No one really wants to be in a war there, except Stan Baker's character and probably Harry Andrews.
Yeah.
The career soldiers. So the interesting thing is, it's that dynamic of, yes, national service is a melting pot of class, but that man's experience of class is manifested as cowardice.
Yeah.
Because he isn't used to sort of the roughness of life, I think they're trying to get across.
Yeah, I think so.
And then at the end, he has that sort of scene where he sacrifices himself. He bayonet charges Chinese machine gun position.
See, because I thought by that time, he was doing that because in his brain, that's gallantry. That's what you do in a war. You like act bravely, but it was actually quite futile and not stupid, but it's a bit futile what he did.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So I thought, oh, that's him trying to prove his character, like prove his worth to everyone.
Yeah, and it's immediately preceded by that really striking scene where he tries to desert.
Yeah.
He's there and he shouts, "Comrades."
Yeah.
And he's trying to sort of cross over to Chinese lines.
Because that says a lot, doesn't it? Yeah, definitely. And then Baker's like, "Look, don't make me shoot you, because I will."
Yeah. That character's very interesting. He's played by Ronald Lewis. Who does a decent job, I think.
Yeah, it's good. I think that some of the dialogue, some of the actors aren't given enough to do.
No, they're not. Like people like Percy Herbert is not given enough to do. Robert Shaw isn't really given enough to do.
You could argue like Stan Baker's a bit underused.
He plays a very one-dimensional but interesting character. So as Corporal Riker, he enjoys being a soldier. It's clear, like he's on the same wavelength as Andrews' character, Sergeant Payne. And, he very much enjoys being there. He relishes, a fight. And, that's his downfall in the end as well.
He's just a hothead, isn't he? You see him kill those 2 Korean villagers.
Yeah.
And then later on, he's trying to, because he was put on a bren, like in a forward slit trench at the temple. And then when he's running back to the temple to try and set up another fire position, he I think the bren gets hit or his rifle gets hit.
Yeah, so like rounds are landing near him and he gets pissed off.
Yeah, he turns around. He's like, "You yellow and such and such."
He keeps mouthing. You can tell he's laying down some obscenities, but you can't hear it over the Bren gun.
No, of course you can't. He gives him a burst from the hip with a Bren, which is one of the immortal images of this movie. Is Stan Baker giving it some of the Bren? I mean, come on.
On the poster.
Yeah, it is on the poster. Yeah, there's a very famous poster. It is a shame that in the 16-man ensemble piece, a lot of voices are lost. And that's one of my criticism of the films, but we'll come on to that in a bit. Andrews
is quite nuanced. Baker's quite nuanced. George Baker, that is, as Butler. Harry Landis is doing great work as Rabin.
Oh, he's a standout. He has to be.
Yeah. And Christ, he even says at the end of the film, like he even says that the war's forgotten.
Yeah, I thought that was quite interesting.
That is
3
very
years
interesting.
after. But apparently, if you read some contemporary history of the Korean War, it is forgotten about quite quickly. Even I did a video on my YouTube channel about the VCs in Korea, and a veteran, when I was compiling research for that, he said, people had it was a height of rationing. They just had a major war coming off the back of World War II. People had it really tough, really hard work, and they didn't want to read about some conflict in a place they'd never heard of. For me, that summed up the cultural thing at the time. Unless you had someone who was involved in it, you might not even looking at, for this review, even looking up Imjin stuff for something else I'm working on. It's on the front page, but it's boxed off to the corner. Unless it's a huge event, it's like sort of and there's some fighting going on in Korea.
Today on a hill in Korea.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it is literally that, which it's a shame. But yeah, at least I like the movie picked that up. At least.
It's a criminally underappreciated piece of British post-war cinema, I think, because it's a classic Last Stand movie of that subgenre of war movies, so it's important in that respect, but it's also important that it's the only real on-screen portrayal of British troops in Korea, criminally so. Sadly, the film's relative obscurity mirrors sort of like the public awareness
I think you're right.
of the war itself.
Yeah.
Despite, recognition of it being a forgotten war for like over a decade, and even like hinted in the dialogue of the film, we still haven't seen any real efforts to explain the conflict, contextualize it, tell the story of the men who actually fought in it.
Not on the British side, at least. There's been American efforts, and
even then, there's not that many American efforts.
No. There's probably more South Korean movies made, obviously more South Korean movies made about the Korean War than there are British or American ones. But I find it very interesting, even looking up documentaries. There's one on the Imjin that was the BBC did in 2000. It's on YouTube. If you can root it out, it's worth a watch because it's really good. But I don't know how something like this hasn't spawned either, not a remake, but either someone going, oh, actually that war's very interesting and you could tell a good story from it. The Imjin story itself, if you want to do a Last Stand film, you do the Gloucesters on Gloucester Hill. Read up on the battle for 20 minutes. It's hooked. It's so engrossing. Read the book To the Last Round by Andrew Salmon if you really want to get to grips with the battle. So it's an absolutely fantastic read. As I mentioned at the start, it makes me wish for that Gloucester's film we never got.
I think A Hill in Korea is an attempt to perhaps sort of tell that story, but, obviously within the budget available.
Of course, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
I think they're trying to take elements of the war and that battle itself and meld them into a small unit sort of story.
But even from a point of view of actors, you're like, well, you've got Robert Shaw, you've got Michael Caine, Harry Andrews, Stan Baker. Even if you're a film of cinema, this is an interesting film to watch because you get to see all these actors before they didn't have to try. And I don't mean in the sense of as they got older, they got worse actors. But I mean, these are actors who are just trying to do a job.
And it's sad that the only recognition the film actually gets now is as Michael Caine's first on-screen credit.
It's very true.
But yeah, I think that A Hill in Korea is the only portrayal of British troops in Korea is a travesty, I think, really.
Yeah, I think that's probably what we're going to end on, really. It's a bit of a somber end to the podcast, but
it's a great film and you should seek it out, even though perhaps the limitations of its pacing and there's possibly too many actors.
I found that as a one criticism that I have is as an ensemble piece, not everyone gets enough to say, and then some people have too much to say, so people get lost. I don't want to say you should kill them off, but if you kill off half the platoon in that first engagement with the Brens, then you could possibly open up more avenues for more characterization. But then, perhaps that's just not the story they wanted to tell, or that's not how the book told the story. So I understand.
The general issue with the pacing is you get that brilliant sort of set piece with the Brens at about 30 minutes in, and then you have them making their way back to the village and then up to the temple. And there's important plot points within that, like Wyatt throws away the radio.
Yep.
There's discussions about, them trying to get back to the British lines. And the cohesion of the unit breaks down a little bit because they're tired and they're on edge and they're being pushed very hard to climb up this hill. And then when they finally get up there, they realise there's actually their lieutenant has led them up this hill where there's no way off it other than the way they came up it.
Yeah.
So that, and then that's where those important discussions of regular soldier versus national servicemen and the class element comes out. So really, I think that could have all been sort of drawn out a little bit earlier, perhaps.
Because I think it ramps you up too much with that Bren section, and you're thinking, right, this is going to be a balls to the wall action adventure now.
Yes.
And then it doesn't. And then right at the end, it tries to replicate that, and it just doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah, I mean, the Cromwell and bazooka scene's great. You don't get any more of those human wave attacks.
No, you don't.
So if they perhaps thrown in a couple of those human wave attacks and, shown a Bren going down, it just jammed. You can't get it working.
Maybe a bit hand to hand.
That's loss of firepower. Yeah, a little bit hand to hand. If the Chinese are getting closer and closer, which they do kind of at the end.
Come. Yeah. Sort of, you want it to ramp and ramp. Oh my God, they're not going to make it. Airstrike. Oh, we can leave. You want that sort of pressure build and relief, but you don't really get anything akin to that. With a bigger budget, possibly, obviously they could have done more, but they did what they could, and I don't think it still holds up. It's still a great film.
It holds up very well.
It's a cracker. You know, and in this Imjin week, you'd do a lot worse because you can't do any better because there aren't any films.
You should definitely seek it out. It was on Talking Pictures in the UK a couple of weeks ago, and we did a bit of a live tweet of it. Very exciting to see it on TV.
Really good.
Talking Pictures doing a great job at bringing back those.
They are
sort of lesser known and almost becoming forgotten films. But it was great to see it on TV, and it was great to sort of like share it with everyone else that was watching at the time.
Really nice, and it's nice to see that the film is still well loved.
It's an important film as a starting point for a lot of careers.
Yep.
And it's also telling a vital story. As I said earlier, it's not a bad film. It's actually, quite enjoyable. And that brain action, wow.
Amazing.
That's unparalleled. So if you can find it, do watch it, because it is well worth an hour and 21, of your time.
Fantastic. As always, don't forget to leave us a like, a subscription, turn on your notifications if you haven't, because if you don't do that, you might not know when we release a new episode. It is every Wednesday, just in case, that's always a good thing to do. Leave us a written review, and we will catch you in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.